Okay, hey guys. I thought I would do a little hangout and presentation on some of the recent hype that's been surrounding Matt Slick's disjunctive syllogism argument, where he implements the transcendental argument from God. This is stemming from a conversation he had with a guy named Alex Malpass, which is kind of been made light of, and uh, a lot of damage control happening lately. There's been a video put out by a guy named Dark Horse. People are starting to talk about it a little bit more because of all this damage control. And because of the discussion surrounding it, I've noticed on both sides of the debate, people are seemingly mischaracterizing it, or maybe not understand it as well as they could. So I figured I would take just a little bit of time, come up with a PowerPoint, go into it in as much detail as I possibly can, and outline, Alex's objections, uh, show show those objections, why they're legitimate, look into the logical form of the disjunct, and kind of just hash it all out and kind of put this thing to rest. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do here with this. So, okay, let's go ahead and check out Matt Slick's disjunctive syllogism argument. It's basically presented pretty close to this. He says either God or not God accounts for the laws of logic. Not God. Therefore, God accounts for the laws of logic. When he says not God, he means not God accounts for the laws of logic. So let's look into the reasoning behind this, or at least what I think Matt Slick's reasoning is behind this. If you look here, I've taken some notes. I think if you look here, either God or not God accounts for the laws of logic. In Matt Slick's eyes, this is established by quote-unquote proper dichotomy. Alex was basically made the distinction that it's just a dichotomy. The word proper doesn't really need to be referenced. I guess so. Matt thinking, since this is a dichotomy, the premise can't be questioned. Okay, so it's rock solid, can't be questioned. Proper dichotomy. Only thing you can question is the second premise, which is not God accounts for the laws of logic, which Matt Slick attempts to establish by his transcendental argument from God. Basically, he goes through all of the proposed things that could account for the laws of logic, discounts those things, and in light of that, says that only God can count for. So without going too much into his transcendental argument for God, this seems to be basically what he's trying to do here. He's putting forth a proper dichotomy, either God or not God accounts for the laws of logic. That's, in his eyes, a rock-solid premise, can't be questioned. The only thing that can be questioned is premise 2, which he's going to establish and feels comfortable with establishing through his transcendental argument for God. Therefore, the conclusion, God accounts for the laws of logic. So, with that being said, the first thing I saw Alex do was basically make an objection that we should probably, to avoid ambiguity, rephrase the argument so it's more formal. So I think one suggestion that we could do is something like this. Either it is the case that God accounts as the necessary and sufficient conditions for the classical Aristotelian laws of logic, or it is not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. Premise 2, it is the case that not God accounts for the laws of logic. Therefore, it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. Okay? And so this would be just formalizing the argument, clearing up any ambiguities, and basically just trying to get it as formal as possible. So from here, as the argument's been cleaned up, and this is obviously what Matt Slick intends. So this is just I think a more formal way to put it. So from here, now that we have it a little more formalized from what Matt Slick intends, Alex basically accused him of begging the question. And I'll go into that. We'll go into what is begging the question and how he's doing it. So here we are, begging the question. Formally, begging the question is where one of the premises in an argument is the same as the conclusion. That's actually what Alex is accusing Matt Slick of doing here, formally begging the question. You can also informally beg the question. This is where you assume as true any proposition under discussion without first providing evidence for the truth of that proposition. So just simply put, for the sake of this discussion, begging the question is going to be any argument whose has at least, or it has a premise that is the same as its conclusion. Okay, so let's move on, and I'm going to show the argument, show the double negation, what that means, and why that basically puts us in the realm of begging, or puts Max Slick in the realm of begging the question. So here's the argument. It is either the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, or it is the case that not God accounts for the laws of logic. It is the case that not God accounts for the laws of logic, therefore it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. Okay, now as you can see, this has a double negative here, and that can just be crossed out, and from there we could just rule God. So we cross out the double negative here, and that just basically equals out to simply this. Either it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, or it is the case that not God accounts for the laws of logic. Premise 2, it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, therefore it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. As you can see here, after we showed the implications of the double negation, meaning positive, we wind up with premise 2 being the same as the conclusion, which would be us formally begging the question in the argument. What's interesting, this just shows it here. This is the exact same. This is the premise. That's the exact same as the conclusion. There's the connection, begging the question. What's interesting about this is a few things. First of all, if you're looking to establish the truth of the conclusion, basically you don't need, in this particular syllogism, you don't need premise 1. Premise 1 is irrelevant. If you're merely trying to establish the truth of the conclusion that it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, then P1 is utterly irrelevant. If premise 2 is true, then the conclusion logically follows. So you can just cross out P1. P1 is meaningless. So if it is true that it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, then it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. Okay, this is begging the question. This is basically A, therefore A. This is formally valid, but it's not an argument. So what do I mean by it's formally valid? It's formally valid insofar as that A implies A, right? From A we can infer A. I think that's called the rule of inference, called iteration. A, therefore A. So with that being said, it's formally valid. Like if it's true that A, then it's true that A. But it's not an argument. Even though it's formally valued, that's not an argument. If by an argument you're trying to establish the truth of the conclusion, but if you're by at least 2 premises that are following an inference rule in an argument, but if you're trying to prove the truth of the conclusion and one of your premises is the truth, that the assumption that the conclusion is true, then you're not providing any argument, like at all. And that fundamentally becomes the problem. So it just boils down to just a simple iteration. It is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, therefore it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. So this is the main problem, and why Alex was raising the objection that it's formally question begging. Now, I think most of you could probably see that now, but I wanted to go into a little bit of detail about the formal structure of this, because I think you can actually help suss this out a little bit better. So we're going to take a look into logical form here and some propositional logic. Propositional logic, you can take different propositions and represent them with basically like a certain letter in a proposition. So that is a propositional variable. So basically, I've tried to color code this so that we can see exactly how the propositional logic is working. So the statement, either it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, that is the proposition, okay? The right here, it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic is the proposition, okay? So if you look, either the proposition or not the proposition. So we can, that boils down to either P or not P, okay? It is not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, so it is not P, not P. This is the original proposition. Therefore, we assert the proposition. So it basically could be boiled down to just a certain logical form, and that's represented here, okay? Either P, it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, or not P, not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. It's not P, it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, therefore P, it is the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. So basically what that works out to very, very simply is just either P or not P, not P, therefore P. And here you can actually see the question begging as well, as it's been formalized in the logical form. So you'll notice that double negation here, not P, happens to be P, and that's the same as the conclusion, which is P. So if you look over here, I've also placed a couple other equations here. This is the actual equation for a disjunctive syllogism properly, and I'll go into that in the next slide. So here we are. This is the proper logical form for base logical form for disjunctive syllogism. It basically just says either P or Q. You negate one of these two, and then you conclude the other. So it can be done either two ways. If it's either P is true or Q is true or both, you negate one and conclude the other, and the other is true, then the conclusion will follow necessarily. That's why it's a valid form of inference in the disjunctive syllogism. So basically, basically what it does is says, look, it's either this or that. You negate one and conclude the other, okay? So either P or Q, you negate Q and conclude P, or you could say it's either P or Q, negate P, and conclude Q, okay? And this is formally valid and sound if either one of these is true or both are true. And that has to do with the inclusive or in propositional logic. So if you come down, I just wanted to simplify it one more time. Properly done, it's either P or Q, not Q, therefore P, or either P or Q, not P, therefore Q. This doesn't beg the question. This is completely valid. And then this is Matt Slick's version. Matt Slick's version only has one propositional variable, just P and its negation. It doesn't have two propositional variables like P and Q. So from here, whatever we do, we're going to have to negate one of these two and then conclude the other. So let's do it both ways. Either P or not P. We're going to negate one of these and conclude the other. So let's negate this one. Okay, It's not P and conclude the other one P, okay? But by doing so, we're begging the question because not P happens to be P. So when we negate P and conclude the other, not P and conclude P, we just formally beg the question. But what if we were to try it the other way? What if we were to negate P and then conclude not P? Well, the same thing would be true. We'd also be begging the question. Have either P or not P. Not P, so we're negating this and concluding the other. Not P, therefore not P. Again, we're simply begging the question. So anytime that you enter just one propositional variable into a disjunctive syllogism, the proposition and the negation of the proposition, it will always come out to be begging the question, which is formally valid. It just doesn't constitute a legitimate argument to prove the truth of any conclusion. With that being said, Matt Slick's fatal error is just using one propositional variable, P, and the negation of that proposition to form a disjunct. If he would use two propositional variables, it would be formally valid, and then he can make arguments to that effect. So just I'm pretty much done here. Very quickly, just in recap, the logical form of a disjunctive syllogism basically follows one of these two formulas. And so what you do is it's either one or the other, and if one of the other is true or both is true, and you negate one and conclude the other, then that's formally valid, and that would be the case. So you could either negate Q, conclude P, negate P, and conclude Q. But what Max Slick has done here is no matter which one of these he negates and the other he concludes, they will always be the same. So that's basically the problem as outlined by Alex Malpass and as it currently stands. So I hope that helps anyone that has been watching all the controversy. And yeah, I appreciate you guys watching, so thank you.